Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. I want to make a deal with all of you. If this video can reach 1,000 likes, my next upload will be an 11-hour video with no mid-roll ads. Okay, fine, you got me. It's already scheduled. It's already going to be the next video. But if you want to drop a like just to let me know I'm doing a good job, just to support the content, I'd really appreciate that. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, as I do post content just like this all of the time. Sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, enjoy the 2 hours of stories with no mid-roll ads right after the ad break after this intro. There won't be any more ad breaks after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. So, why is it called Hollow Skin Grove? Eli finally began a few minutes into our hike. I don't know, Heather returned. Probably named after a type of tree that grows around here or something. What? That's a lame answer. What do you mean you don't know? Isn't it your job to research the locations before we check them out? Well, yeah, but the location names aren't always the important part. Just because an area is allegedly haunted doesn't mean it'll be named after the legend. Yeah, it does. That's like 90% of haunted locations. Goatman's Bridge, Amityville House, Gettysburg Battlefield. Okay, well, Goatman's Bridge is a nickname given to Alton Bridge. It was named something else before it was haunted. Same thing with the Queen Mary. The boat isn't actually haunted by the Queen, dude. Look, all I'm saying is that Hollow Skin Grove definitely sounds like a location based on a local legend, more than the local flora. Heather shrugged. I don't know what to tell you. Well, I looked into it. All that came up was mentions of it in online forums, and nobody had seemed to actually walk all the way out to the place to confirm what it was. It was all inconsistent accounts from locals about strange noises and figures in the woods. Nothing to link the name to. Hang on. Eli snickered, slowing his pace and placing a hand to his head. You're telling me that we're walking miles out into possibly gator-infested bayous on the word of inconsistent accounts? Look, Eli, we're already scraping the bottom of the barrel here. We've hit all the big ones that we can afford to drive to. So unless you want to start funding plane tickets out of state, this is the best we got. My friend put his arms up in defeat, then crossed them with a smirk. Alright, fine. I'm just saying, we already drove 3 hours to get here, so it'd better be worth it. What's one of these so-called accounts? Convince me. I saw a slight smirk appear on Heather's lips, eager to finally flex her knowledge. Well, like I said, there was a lot of the usual stuff. People hearing noises late at night, screams, moans, ghoulish wails, standard ghost fare, she mocked, wiggling her fingers. But the thing that got me was the disappearances. One of these spots, Jackson finally cued in with a chuckle. How many this time? Allegedly, quite a few. I didn't look into records and stuff for authenticity, but there are a few people who claimed it and gave names, so there has to be merit. A lot of decent-sized towns surrounding this area, so it's not unbelievable that the population could get lost out here. Jackson kept his hands stuffed in the pockets behind his overalls, but adjusted his shoulders nervously. I mean, isn't it possible that they just sort of got stuck in the swamp somewhere, fell into the water, and a gator ate them? That caused Eli to stop in his tracks. Oh, come on, Heather, really? Is that what we're walking into? I am not wading into the bog if... Okay, would you two chill out with the gators? Heather rolled her eyes. This area is clear. There haven't been wildlife reports on crocs in a long time. I made sure of all that. You think I'd want to be out here if that were the case? Hey, don't lump me in with Eli. Jackson chuckled. I was simply pointing out the possibility that maybe those wails and vanishings were not so paranormal. Always healthy to have a stick in the mud along for the ride on our paranormal hunting crew. I quipped at him with a smug look. Keeps us grounded. He flipped me off. Well, if y'all would let me finish my debrief, I could probably diffuse any skepticism you may be having. Heather teasingly huffed. Right. Carry on, I urged her. I had already heard the tale that I knew she was about to tell when she texted me about the spot, but I was eager to hear it again. Thank you, Shell. She gleamed showily before setting her face back into its ominous glare. So there's all these disappearances, right? And that's creepy enough, but get this. There's this guy on one forum, and this area is super low-key, mind you. Not the kind of place that people would actively just make stuff up over, like other urban spots. This guy comes in with a story about how he's out in the woods fishing, right? It's secluded, it's peaceful, and there seems to be a decent amount of fish. So he hangs around for a while, and gets carried away till the sun sets to about where it is now. I can feel the hot, humid air around us chill a bit as Jackson, Eli, and I look at the sky that Heather gestures to. The sun's nearly set below the fingers of the surrounding trees, casting the world in that silvery blue haze that comes with twilight, that scarce hour between the hushing of birds and the waking of crickets. A limbo where the comfort of day meets the unknown of night. My excitement grew as Heather continued. Now, according to him, he's a rugged redneck type, the kind that doesn't scare easy, and certainly doesn't fear the dark. But he says that as the lights start to dim, he starts getting this eerie feeling. The air starts to smell rancid, and not like the usual swamp stench. He said it was pure rot. Dead fish and hot old meat. So he's standing there on the shoreline near the water, starting to get a chill up his spine, and he's finally about to leave, but then he hears a slosh across the way. Heather stuck her boot out to a spot where enough water pooled to make a puddle and dragged her foot roughly through it, acquainting our ears with the same sound the man must have heard. He looks up, and there among the trees of the willows and water oaks that are sticking out of the bayou, he sees this man. Oh, crap, Eli mutters, a tinge of excitement to his tone. He says, from what he can make out, the guy looks normal. Average size, plain build, hair not too long like he's wild or something. But the thing that stands out about him is his skin. The dude is pale as hell and completely naked, just standing in the middle of a swamp before nightfall. Oh, hell no, I chuckled, the anticipation building in my chest. I already knew the payoff, and Heather knew that I did, but she indulged me anyway. Oh, it gets worse, because the guy isn't even moving. He's just standing there, still as a statue, staring, sopping wet, with his eyes open wide and mouth hanging in a silent scream. What the? Jackson gasped. The guy who posted the story said that he just stands there, not moving, too shocked by what he's looking at. He says the guy doesn't move either, at least, not for some time. He just stands there with his arms out like this. Heather demonstrated by lifting her arms slightly from her sides and letting them hover there, inhumanly, uncomfortably. He said that as he stood frozen, eyeing the stranger down and waiting for him to make a move, he focused in on his face, and that's when he noticed it. He hadn't seen it before because of the weird lighting in the distance, but the man in the water, his eyes were black like coal, just two dark pools boring deep into him. Heather came to a complete stop in her leading, turning to face us with an expression to mirror the one flickering against the back of our eyes. He said as soon as he noticed it, and the flag finally went off to run, the man out in the swamp crouched down, sinking himself into the water until he disappeared, He said the last thing he saw as he snatched up his rod and ran was bubbles on the surface, slowly gargling toward him. We'd all been so invested in her story that we hadn't even realized we'd reached the end of the walking trail, so all of us jumped a bit as Heather backed up without looking, sloshing into the water of the bayou until it rose to her knees. With an innocent smirk, she said, "Well, come on in. The rest of the way we move by pond." Eli, Jackson, and I all looked at one another, and with varying degrees of confidence, checked our waders, then sloshed in after her. And there it was, with the finale of Heather's masterful storytelling. I felt it, that shiver up my spine, that anxiety in my gut, that sweet, sweet adrenaline of fear that only the unknown could bring. It was the high we all chased. It was the reason we did what we did. A lot of people wouldn't fancy the idea of willingly going somewhere they thought might be haunted, but me? I lived for it. Ever since I was a kid, I was fascinated by ghost stories and urban legends. Things that people couldn't explain or places that's origins were borderline unknown. That's a special rush with the unexplained that you just don't get anywhere else. A nagging itch that begs you to scratch it as you uncover more and more truths. That's what always drove me into places like this. Dark forests and abandoned houses. Places so mysterious and dripping with potential that an entire county could make up cultures built around them. But it's always a double-edged sword. That mystery is great, yeah, but it only takes you so far. Most of the time you get there, and after a few hours, the case is closed. It's all made up. The forest really is just dark, and that's all that it is. And that abandoned house, the detached footsteps you were warned of and ghostly groans tend to just be its old wooden joints creaking and popping. The payoff is never as good as the build-up, and though years of running the same routine had yielded minimal results, it never stopped me from pursuing more, because at the end of the day, the high was worth the hangover. It was fun to explore and freak yourself out with friends for an hour or two, because at least the memories that followed outweighed the letdown of the lack of anything real. I think deep down, though, even though I often told myself that, I truly did one day hope to find a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow. Something real and tangible to show that I wasn't silly for chasing childhood campfire tales. Something truly paranormal to scratch that insatiable itch once and for all, whose mystery I could chase until the end of time. Looking back now, I feel foolish for ever wishing for such a thing, for ever thinking that finding such a horror would bring anything good. Our hike through the water began slow and careful, moving through the murk so as to not slosh any into our overalls. We'd borrowed the gear from Eli's dad, and aside from wanting to keep dry ourselves, we really didn't want to return it waterlogged. "Shelby, can you pass the GPS?" Heather asked, leaning back. As much as I'd like to pretend I studied the map by heart, we're gonna get turned around fast with all the water. "What's up with all this anyway? I thought you said there was a walking path," Eli asked. "Apparently there is, but the summer rains flood the bayou and brings the levels up. Someone in the forum who came out here said the place is more worth coming like this anyway. Adds to the creep factor." "I hope so," Jason snickered. "This has to be one of the most intensive treks we've done so far." "It'll be worth it, I bet," I chimed in. "I've got a good feeling about this one." I really did. Maybe it was all that prep and extra effort that made it feel more of a grand adventure, but as the sun set lower in the sky and the space between the trees grew from that hazy blue to a dark, foreboding black, my heart thrummed faster. Deeper into the bog we went, further away from civilization, and more into an unknown that so few other people had dared to travel. Us, though? We were going all the way. That was the plan, at least. Where so many other people had chickened out and never made it to the grove itself, we had the intention of getting to the clearing and seeing if we'd really find the mysterious man of the bayou. Solid proof that all our searching wasn't in vain. We were grizzled veterans at this by now, and we weren't going to be deterred. Then again, maybe a grizzled veteran would have turned back. Maybe they would have seen the signs and got out of that swamp as fast as possible. Maybe it was so many years of that nagging itch that drove us deeper into those woods against our better judgment. I didn't start to feel it until the twine. We had been moving around for half an hour, Heather guiding fearlessly in the front. Eli was behind her, then me, then Jackson heading up the rear. We'd flicked our flashlights on now that the swamp had become a dark maze of moss-tangled stumps and algae-ridden pools. I held my breath each time I swept mine through the trees, caught in the middle of both the desire and fear of spotting a man nestled among the dark bark. He never appeared, though, no matter how deep we went, and there wasn't a noise out of place save the occasional Huron song to join the chorus of cricket chirps. That changed when suddenly Eli went tumbling forward in front of me, nearly toppling into the musky basin, if not for Heather's back to catch himself on. "Whoa, Eli," she scoffed as water sloshed up behind her, sprinkling her back and pouring a bit down her waders. She was mad, but once she saw the state of our friend, she stopped complaining. It was clear he got it worse. All of us tried to be sensitive, but we couldn't help but crack snickers as Eli stood back up, water dripping down his face and shirt as he glared on amused. Eventually our chuckles broke him down, and he started to giggle too. Yeah, laugh it up. It was bound to happen to one of us eventually. There was no way we made it out of here dry. "Of course it happens to you too, man." Jackson shook his head. "You good? What did you even trip over?" "I think a root or something. Whatever it was hooked my foot good." "Maybe it was this," I offered, shining my light in the space between him and I. Up from the depths, a thin line of string had surfaced. We all gathered to look and saw that it was just simple twine. Coarse hairs tangled together and bound to make a rope just thicker than a plastic straw. Heather reached out and pulled it up with a finger. We had gloves on, so none of us had qualms about touching it, but she still couldn't hide her disgust as the string dripped with pond scum and algae. Beneath it, we could barely make out the fibrous bright white the twine once was. "This looks man-made," Heather noted. "You did say this was a walk path," Jackson replied, grabbing one end and tugging. At first we thought the string was simply loose, but as he pulled, more emerged from the water, going taut somewhere beneath the surface near a tree, like it was tied to the stump. "If this is a flood area, they probably strung these up to make sure people could still find the trail." "I guess that would make sense," I nodded. Eli hesitated a moment before responding. "Either that, or it was a fence to warn to keep out." That sent another chill across the air, this one much stronger than the last. It was night now, and though Heather's recount was scary, nothing was more exciting than being closer to the grove, possibly finding the border that warned there was no going back. Still, even though I bought the boys' theories, something about the string put me off. It was unusually low to the ground for a guiding line, and though it could have slipped, it was also white. Wouldn't something for safety be a more fluorescent color like yellow or orange? Heather didn't help ease the feeling as she spoke, tugging the coil tight again and tracing it with her eyes between GPS glances. "Well, my money is on Jackson. The rope leads along the same path we need to walk." "That's good to know. If we get lost from your terrible navigation, we can use this to get back." Eli smirked. Heather flipped him off before turning forward and continuing on. the rope still in her hand as a railing. Everyone laughed at the interaction and moved on, but I couldn't give more than a courtesy chuckle. The rope on the abandoned path in the middle of nowhere that rarely anyone ever walked led along the same path we were on. And well, maybe Eli was right about getting back. To me, it felt more like it was beckoning us forward. From that point on, the twine became our new GPS. Before, Heather had to stop now and then to orient us, but with the rope, it was winding onward in the exact path toward Hollow Skin. Maybe Jackson was right, but the longer the rope ran, and the more stumps we found it lassoed to, the less it sat right with me. If this trail really was so obscure and unknown, why would someone take the time to hang lines up around it? We'd been down roads far more traveled with fewer safety precautions. Still, I didn't say anything yet. Nobody else seemed bothered by the occurrence, so I left it be, lest I amp up the fear too early into the journey. Turns out, I didn't have to. Our second omen to turn back came another 10 minutes later. We heard our first abnormal noise. Eli and Heather were small talking about the surrounding trees, pointing out a few barkless types that could be considered hollow-skinned. How is that hollow skin? Eli snorted. It would have to be a tree with all bark and no trunk, not the other way around. Whatever. People name things weirdly all the time. Why do we call it a driveway when it's where we park? Eli ignored that excuse and looked around. These trees are pretty weird, though. They look like regular oaks, so why do so many have their bark missing? Maybe termites, or something about this area makes it rot off. Heather fake gasped, then turned back and slapped his shoulder to a halt. Maybe the skin falls to the ground and becomes, get this, hollow. Boo, Eli scoffed. Jackson and I sat listening to their bickering with amused grins, the only other noise being the ambience of our sloshing and the nocturnal fauna. Then it wailed out. It was distant, yet too close for comfort, somewhere just off in the trees beyond our flashlight beams. A shrill, raspy whine. It was low and crackly at first, but slowly whined out to a steady tune after a moment, like somebody slowly scraped at an untuned violin string. It was impossible that we imagined it, because the forest heard it too. The symphony of the night went hushed around us, and our sloshing stopped. All flashlights shot in its direction, and the four of us held perfectly still, not even ripping the water pressed against our pants. We stood that way for what could have been an hour, and the whole time I don't think I heard a single person take a breath. But then water sloshed from behind a tree. At that, I let out a yelp, and Eli swore under his breath. All of us pivoted in the water and took a few steps back, but with the murk pushing back against us, we didn't make it far. Whatever was coming at us was much faster, and we didn't stand a chance. In the chaos, Heather finally managed to shine her beam in its direction to get a clear view of our attacker, and an offended river otter squinted its eyes as we rudely blinded it before ducking away from us and submerging in the water. All of us stopped our frantic thrashing and panted before turning inward to make eye contact. In our wild sprint, we'd all joined Eli among the wet and waterlogged. Slowly, we broke into laughter. Alright, that may be the most terrified I've ever been on one of these expeditions. Jackson chuckled. That scared the piss out of me. Literally, Eli said, looking down. You all may want to clear away. Shut up, Heather splashed him, wiping her own face and sighing. God, when people said they heard things out here, I thought for sure it was just going to be owls or something. What the hell was that? There's no way it was the otter. I chuckled nervously. I was amused by the whole situation myself, but admittedly, I was still pretty freaked. It came from way past it. It could have been a bird call, Jackson pondered, looking back to the shadows we'd heard the sound from. There are some animals that sound creepy like that. Hell, even mountain lions at night sound like women screaming. Maybe, Eli agreed. But whatever it is, I don't think I care to find out. Was that a good enough fill for this trip? We all got a good kick of adrenaline and were soaking wet. So I think that's a win in my book. Finally, having an out, I jumped in. Yeah, honestly, even if that was an animal, I don't know if it's one we want to see. Not if it sounded like that. I think I could chalk that up to ghost-proof and be happy. What? Seriously? Heather scoffed. Guys, we've already hiked for an hour. The glade isn't much further. We may as well go the rest of the way. I thought the whole goal was to do what everyone else couldn't, remember? Eli made a face. Heather, did you not just hear that? There's no way you want to go closer to whatever that was. I was just going along with the animal thing to keep from freaking, but it was not natural. It kind of sounded mechanical, Jackson said. Like an instrument. Okay, and so what? Heather shrugged with a smile, trying not to seem too eager. I thought the whole reason we did these trips was to find the paranormal, and now that we've finally got something truly weird, we just want to run? Well, the real paranormal is a lot freakier than convincing ourselves we heard something, Eli said. Heather kept her face high for a moment, trying her best to still win us over with confidence. But when she saw that nobody was biting, not even me, she broke with a sigh. Well, I'm still going to go. It can't be more than 5 minutes of walking. Sticking the GPS out, she handed it to Eli. He shook his head. Heather, no way. What? I'll be fine. I can just follow the rope back. I'll be right behind you guys by the time you get back to the car. No, nuh-uh. I know what you're doing, Eli threatened. She cocked her head. What am I doing? You know that if you go alone, we're not going to let you. No, seriously. I want you guys to go back to the car. I don't want you to be miserable out here if you're done. I just really want to know what's up with this place. Heather's eyes fell on me as she said that, and suddenly guilt weighed heavy in my stomach. I sensed she was being genuine, so I shouldn't have felt bad if I wanted to leave, but it wasn't that. Heather was ride or die. She'd followed me into some more places than I could count, and all of it was for nothing. Now, here we were with something that actually had potential, something I'd looked for my entire life, and I was running from its literal call to adventure. What kind of friend would I have been if I had made Heather go at it alone? I'll come to. I spoke softly, a smile turning at my lips. Well, I guess we all go then. Jackson jumped in. We aren't just gonna let you two get lost out here. Heather tried to protest. No, guys, seriously. I don't want you to. Yeah, so noble. Thanks for the offer. Come on, ladies. Eli sighed, brushing past us and following the GPS he now held in his hand. Heather turned back at me with a beaming smile, then quickly faced forward, tagging close behind a grinning Eli. I was happy they were smiling in that moment. Jackson and I were too. I think it was the last moment that any of us ever did. As we approached the glade, patches of land once again became visible among the oaks. They were mainly plateaus of mud and shrubs, nothing stable enough to walk on, but it was at least nice to see land again. Eli was leading now since he had the GPS, but the string was still our guide. Its slimy, slick coat gunked our gloves as we tugged along it, shining our beams in every direction to make sure nothing caught us off guard again. As we moved, that squeal on the horizon kept looping in my head like a bad song. making the skin crawl and itch the closer we got to its source. I imagined how much more chilling it would have been to hear it from the distance we now stood, only a few yards from the grove. Ahead, I could see it. The trees got denser a dozen yards ahead, then beyond, opened up into a small pond the size of a neighborhood cul-de-sac. The trees had been ominous with our lights dancing between them, but somehow the open space was even more foreboding. The still, algae-topped water could hide anything below, and with the fisherman's story still fresh in my mind, I kept thinking about that pale, naked man with soulless eyes rising from the depths. Before we reached it, however, there was one more step, one final chance for us to turn around. Protruding from the water a few yards in front of us, our flashlight skimmed across a small island of muck and pond scum, a plot of land just barely gasping above the surrounding flood. The rope led straight onto the platform, but there was no tree that it was tied around this time. Instead, it roped onto something nestled among the shrubs that contrasted the dark muck harshly. As we approached with caution, I tried to make out what it was, but something paused our progress. "Ow!" Eli suddenly blurted. We all hesitated behind him, and our heads popped out of line to see what the holdup was. "You good, man?" Jackson called. "Yeah, there was just a huge thorn caught on the rope that stuck me. Punched straight through my glove." We broke formation and sloshed forward, gathering around to investigate. Eli held his hand beneath the beam of his light until one of us offered our own, to which he plucked out the pale barb that had stuck into his hand. It was a milky white, and straight like a needle. I furrowed my brow, finding the color and shape odd for a thorn bush, then turned to check the spot in the twine that he'd got bit by. "Oh no," I gasped, running my beam along the rope. The whole thing was covered in them. They weren't all as big as the one that got Eli, but beneath the mud and grime that had been coating the string, I finally saw them, tiny little barbs frayed from their binding. At first I thought the twine was just old and tattered, but the closer I looked, the more I noticed it was by design. The quills all furled out in the direction we'd come from, and as I checked my glove, I noticed there were several that had caught the latex, but not been able to puncture. My breaths grew rapid as I hastily plucked them out and threw them away from me. Eli and Jackson turned to see what I saw, then grew worried looks on their faces. Eli tugged loose his glove and looked down at his palm to find that the spot where he'd been pricked was already turning red and inflamed. The three of us were so confused and horrified that we hadn't even noticed that Heather had stayed a few feet away. Before any of us could commentate on the matter, she called out with utter distress in her voice, "Oh my God!" The three of us turned to her, then looked past where she was looking. On the island, the pale objects in the bushes were finally visible. Bones. More specifically, a rib cage. They were far too large to be a human's, but bones were bones nonetheless. Almost in a trance, we all sloshed closer, our collective hearts banging the same dread-filled drum. It was a cow, large and half stuck in the mud. Its legs had sunk beneath the murk as it collapsed onto its side, leaving only its top half exposed. Its neck ran in a jumbled mess of parts to where its skull lay half peering out at us. But all of that was only the parts that we could confidently make out. Because while it was clearly a cow's skeleton, something was horribly wrong with it. Scraps of flesh and fur still clung to bits and pieces of it, as well as a strange, spongy red meat, porous with holes and glistening in our lights. Its bones in places along the rib cage had seemingly grown outward, fusing together at spots to make solid bridges, almost like a barrel of bone and marrow. All of that maybe could have been explained away by strange decomposition conditions, or a birth defect. but what we couldn't deny was what covered the rest of it. Along its femurs and spinal cords were strange bubbles in the bone, bumps like the burls on a tree. Half its skull was unrecognizable this way, a cloud of strange lumps like its face had boiled into a froth, then hardened. Bubbles was a very intentional word choice, because that's exactly what they were. Certain parts of the bone had cracked and fallen away, showing that the lumps were hollow. It was as if the beast liquefied, then hardened in a matter of moments. None of us had any words, and none of us could move, only stare down at the abhorrent thing glued to the swamp floor beneath our feet. I remember as we all tried to process what we were seeing, I could only muster one single horrifying thought. A body this decayed would have certainly been sunken underneath the water during the flood. That meant it was fresh, and somehow still missing its skin. How did a cow get out here? Heather muttered. Why does it look like that? Jackson tried to bring us back down with logic, his comforting form of denial. Still, the frantic shudder in his breath betrayed his words. It must have been a pasture cow that wandered off from a nearby field. The swamp gases, maybe it messed with its decomposition. Swamp gases? Heather laughed with no humor to her tone. Jackson, you need nuclear waste to do that to a body. What is this? I don't know, I cut in. But we've seen enough. We need to leave. Now. Heather looked down at the body with wide eyes and shallow breath, nodding in agreement. Seeing her go from so adamant to continue to downright petrified only compounded my fear. I had never seen the girl so afraid in my entire life. If even she felt something was wrong, then something was undoubtedly wrong. Finally, we were all in agreement to leave, but even though we'd taken that last chance, it was too late. A sloshing from the clearing ahead made us all jump and stagger back, whipping our beams up into the shadow. The sprawling pool before us ignited beneath the ghastly white beams of our flashlights. And there it emerged, a pale figure wearing no clothes, mouth agape and dark sockets staring holes through us. The man from the story hadn't done the horror justice. Its skin was loose and haggard on its skeleton, like it was nothing more than a cheap rubber suit, and its hair was greasy and foul. Its feet were still hidden below the water, but its fingers were nothing more than limp, dangling flaps that dripped marsh water as it slowly rose from the pond. It wasn't until I noticed the dark spots on various parts of its form that I realized its true nature. Dark spots, like its sockets. They weren't marks or black, soulless eyes. They were holes. Holes in a suit of skin stretched up on some unseen skeleton rising out of the water. Its open mouth and sunken brow suddenly looked less like a haunting wail, and more like a horrified scream frozen in time, a cry for help that never came. As its feet crested the water, those awful, flayed feet that flapped loosely in the night breeze, I saw what was holding it up, a mountain of that spongy red meat soaked in mud and algae, a tangle of white, curved bone winding up and disappearing in its hollow puppet. Pale, worming tendrils waved from the holes in the crimson flesh, not dissimilar to the ones on the rope we'd been holding up, and my stomach turned over in my gut. That wasn't the end, though. In the fraction of a moment that I was able to take all of that in, more bubbles began to froth in the clearing around us. From the water rose even more suits of skin, all with the same desperate, wailing expression gasping at their face. Men, women, animals of every kind that were stretched in abnormal ways. As if whatever was holding them up didn't quite know what to make of their various forms. I prayed that the smaller human suits I saw weren't what I believed them to be. None of us screamed or made a sound. We just turned to run. The water had never felt thicker as we splashed into it, making a break back the way we'd come. I turned over my shoulder, horrified that I might see the figures gliding through the swamp after us, but instead I saw something worse. Eli wasn't moving. He was still perched on the island, staring vacantly off into the bog. I could see by his posture that he wasn't sharing the same fear that we were. In fact, he looked almost calm. "Eli, let's move," I shouted, my voice breaking with utter terror. Still, it scared me more that he didn't move. He didn't even flinch. I knew then and there that something was wrong. Whatever was in that water had him already, and it was too late. Still, I began charging back. We couldn't leave him. Not here. Not with these things. My boots sloshed out of the water back onto the mud just in time to see the full horror set before me. Dozens of bodies conglomerated together. Flies flocking and buzzing in and out of their holes like some sick sort of hive. Then in the middle of them, one last body bubbled up. It wasn't human this time, nor animal. It was pure, incomprehensible flesh, a mountain of soaking meat filled with excited white worms that squirmed and danced in the hot swamp air. Spines and large ribs stuck out from its serpentine mass. That stiffness had been stolen. They seemed to shift and writhe beneath my flashlight like tentacles, snapping straight at random and releasing harsh clacks. From its center spread large blankets of red tissue, almost like petals on a flower, and they too seemed to jitter and vibrate in the air like it was alive. Its head was nowhere at all, just a large gaping pit, plunging into a darkness of its body, a darkness that several pale ropes ran into. The string that we'd been following went taut, and from the water arose even more, running off into the woods in every direction. I felt mad looking at the creature, my brain hardly fathoming that something so horrifying might exist. Unable to bear it any longer, I reached out for Eli's hand. "Eli, please, let go." My palm gripped around his hand, the one that had been pricked with the thorn, and my body went numb as it crumbled in my grasp. The skin wadded in on itself, like I was grabbing a latex glove filled with water, and inside I could feel hard bits floating around like chunks in a stew. Bile would have risen to my throat if it could, my swirling brain unable to take any more. But I was shocked numb as Eli turned back to me, his face vacant and blank, and his eyes pouring blood. Behind him, the vile flower of flesh and bone released a sound from its pit that vibrated my teeth and made my head pound, a sound like a coarse violin string being scraped. Eli turned back to it, as if in a trance, then began moving closer into the water, his skin sagging as he went. I could barely move as tears streamed down my cheeks, the image of my friend sinking below the murk, etching into my memory for the rest of my days. A harsh yank from my right brought me back down to reality, and I turned to see Heather tugging me along, her own face slick with tears and snot. She called out to me, but I couldn't hear her. The world had gone silent. Still, her expression demanded loudly without sound, and my body followed it instinctively. Run. So we did. I don't know how long or how fast, but we simply ran. Eli had the GPS, which meant we had no clue which way we were going, but it didn't matter. So long as it was away from that thing at the heart of the glade, it didn't matter. My legs had been aching from the miles of water we'd already pushed through, but they were in a whole new pain as they pumped to their absolute limit. It felt like running in a dream, that slow, painful slosh away from something out to tear us limb from limb. Even if the thing wasn't giving a proper chase, which none of us dared to look back and check, there was still the ropes. Each spear of our legs into the water was a heart-pounding gamble. Each push forward was filled with dread that we might feel the prickly tongues of the living flesh catch our guts and turn us into the same living soup that it had to Eli. His name hurt to think. It hurt even more with each step we ran away from him, leaving him to whatever fates had swallowed him whole. I don't remember when I blacked out, or for how long, but when I woke up, it was to a flurry of family, doctors, and police. Apparently the three of us had been found collapsed on the side of a road near the swamp's edge, covered in blood and rambling incoherently. None of us remembered this, too exhausted to even think past that point. Once we were checked over and released from medical care, it was straight to the police. They asked us what had happened and where Eli was, but we didn't have a good answer for them. There was none to either question. We tried to tell the truth. We knew how it sounded, and we knew how they would react. But it was worth a shot. The concerned looks and skeptical glances between the officers told us all we needed to know. There was one thing I noticed, however, a look on the sheriff's face when I brought up the name Hollow Skin Grove. It was recognition. It was a small flicker of fear. As quickly as I noticed it, however, the man smoothed it away to never return. Still, as I talked, I could sense it behind his gaze, something deeper than skepticism. Whether my insight was correct or not, it didn't matter. Our story was never entertained, and in the end, the whole thing was ruled as group mania, a hallucination induced by a collective panic we'd gotten while lost in the swamp. And Eli? Searches were conducted over the next few weeks, but of course a body was never found. Not that I believe in the efforts that were claimed to have been made. When his parents kept pushing that they search until at least a corpse turned up, the police finally released an official statement. An alligator. A rogue gator had migrated north and found its way into the country, settling in the swamp and yanking unsuspecting hikers into the murk. They were convincing about it too. Even hauled the corpse of a gator they must have shot down south, up and paraded it out of the forest to back their story. I like to think that Eli would have found it all funny if he were still here. He ended up being right about the Crocs all along. He's not here though, and of course, none of us are laughing. Jackson hasn't been able to get out of bed for the last few months. I'm pretty much the same. Heather blames herself for what happened. Of course, how could she not? Still, I don't fault her too much. Even if it was her who urged us to keep going, we had no idea what was sleeping in those waters, what horror was lying beneath the pond. We do now, though. We know far too much. I suppose that's why I'm writing this, because unlike the others, we did what we had set out to do. We went to the end of Hollow Skin Grove and found out what was there. So despite what you see about it hushed whispers on forums, and in the quiet corners of the internet, I'm begging you, if you're a thrill seeker like we once were, don't go to Hollow Skin Grove. I assure you, whatever it is you'll find there is more horror than you ever want to witness. The thing about Ryan was that he never committed to anything scary. Horror movies were out, roller coasters were out. Even choosing colleges stressed him out because it meant closing doors, making something real and final. His therapist called it decision paralysis. I called it self-preservation. When your dad walks out and your mom stops getting out of bed, you learn that some questions are better left unasked. I understood that. Ryan's mom had that kind of depression that kept the curtains drawn for weeks at a time. His dad left when Ryan was 11, and the last thing the guy said before walking out was that Ryan needed to man up and help your mother. So Ryan learned to be quiet, to fade into the background of rooms, to make himself small enough that his presence wouldn't be another burden to anyone to carry. Casey was the opposite. She took up space like she'd been told her whole life she deserved to. Student council, debate team, Instagram aesthetic, so carefully curated it looked effortless. Her parents were the kind of people who showed up to every event with professional cameras, who had her entire academic future mapped out on a literal poster board in their home office. Yale, then law school, then partnership in her father's firm. The thing was, Casey actually wanted none of that. She told me once, sophomore year, that she wished she could just work in a plant nursery, spend her days with her hands in dirt, helping things grow. But she'd said it like it was a joke. Like the idea of disappointing her parents was so unthinkable, it could only exist as fantasy. And Luke? Luke was more complicated than I wanted him to be. He was tall, yeah, played varsity football, had the kind of easy confidence that came from never being told he couldn't do something. But here's the thing nobody else seemed to notice. Luke's dad hit him, not often enough to leave marks that lasted, but enough. I'd seen Luke flinch once when Ryan clapped him on the shoulder too suddenly, seen the way he stood sometimes, favoring his left side like his ribs were sore. He never talked about it, and I never asked, but it was there between us like smoke. That's why he cheated on Casey, probably. Self-sabotage is a kind of protection. If you ruin it first, nobody can take it from you. I understood the logic even if I hated what it did to her, even if watching her take him back felt like watching someone walk into traffic. Me? I was just trying to get through high school without my own damage becoming everyone else's problem. The folklore started on a Reddit thread. Someone's uncle's coworker knew a guy who'd gone into the woods behind County Memorial and came back wrong. Different. Kept talking about prices and payments and how everything costs something. 3 weeks later, he drove his truck into the lake with his whole family inside. It's BS, Ryan had said when Casey had first brought it up, but his fingers were already drumming that nervous pattern on his knee. The one that meant he was thinking about it too hard, letting it get under his skin. Probably, Casey said. She was scrolling through satellite images of the hospital on her phone, zooming in on the forest that pressed against its southern edge. But wouldn't it be cool to check out? Just the hospital, I mean. Urban exploration? The hospital had been abandoned since 2003. County Memorial, built in the 40s. Shut down after some Medicare fraud thing bankrupted the board. 6 stories of brick and broken windows, wrapped in chain link and covered in the kind of graffiti that suggested people came out here specifically to be forgotten. The forest beyond it was old-growth pine, dense enough that hikers got lost every few years. Search parties, helicopters, the whole production. Sometimes they found the bodies. We were standing by Casey's locker between 3rd and 4th period when she pitched the idea. Ryan looked like he wanted to crawl into the ventilation system. I was trying to figure out how to say no without sounding as scared as I felt when Luke appeared. He had his way of moving through crowds like they were designed to part for him. People just stepped aside. He came up behind Casey and wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her off her feet. She shrieked, kicking her legs, laughing in that way that made my stomach hurt. "What are we talking about?" Luke asked, setting her down. Casey turned in his arms, already grinning. "The hospital, the one with the woods out back. We're thinking of exploring it." "Sounds boring," Luke said. But he was looking at me when he said it, one eyebrow raised. "Unless you're afraid." There it was. The hook. Luke knew exactly what he was doing. He'd been doing it since middle school. This casual needling that made saying no feel like admitting weakness. It was manipulative and obvious, and it worked anyway because I was 17 and stupid. "Tonight," I said. 7 o'clock. Luke smiled. Ryan looked like he might throw up. I told my parents I was sleeping at Ryan's. They barely looked up from their respective screens. My dad worked in insurance. My mom taught elementary school, and both of them seemed relieved I had friends to occupy my time. Teenagers were a mystery they decided not to solve. I climbed out my bedroom window at 6:30, dropping into the backyard with an impact that made my ankles ache. My bike was old, inherited from a cousin, and the chain made a clicking sound that seemed too loud in the quiet suburban evening. I texted Ryan that I was heading out. He sent back a thumbs up and nothing else. The hospital was 4 miles away, past the nice part of town and into the part where houses had bars on the windows. The sun was setting, turning the sky the color of a bruise. By the time I reached the parking lot, full dark had fallen. The place looked worse than the photos suggested. The fog was real, thick enough that it pooled in low spots like something liquid. The hospital loomed beyond it, all those shattered windows like eye sockets in a skull. Someone had painted Memento Mori across the main entrance in dripping red letters. My breath came out in clouds. October in New England. The kind of cold that got into your bones and stayed there. I tried Ryan's phone. It went straight to voicemail. Casey's rang 4 times and went to her cheerful recording. I took a photo, posted it to Instagram with the caption, "Bad decisions loading," and watched it get 3 likes before I'd even pocketed my phone. Headlights swept across the lot. Luke's Camaro, black and impractical. His dad's cast off. The engine ticked as it cooled. Luke climbed out first, Casey from the passenger side. She was wearing his Letterman jacket over her hoodie, drowning in it. "Jesus," Luke said, breath fogging. "It's freezing. Remind me why we're doing this?" "Adventure," Casey said, but she'd lost some of that enthusiasm from earlier. She looked small in the empty parking lot, younger than usual. "Ryan's not here yet," I said. Luke snorted, probably chickened out. Then we heard the bike. Ryan came pedaling into the lot like he was being chased, skidding to a stop next to mine. His helmet was crooked, his face flushed red from cold and exertion. "Where the hell were you?" I asked. "I called." "Got lost," Ryan panted. "No signal out here. Everything looks the same in the dark." Casey was staring at the hospital now, really looking at it. "Maybe this is stupid," she said quietly. "Maybe we should just go home." "We drove all the way out here," Luke said. He was already walking toward the building, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. "Come on." We followed the fence line around to the back. Up close, the hospital felt worse. Bigger, more present, like it was aware of us in some fundamental way. The windows on the ground floor were boarded over, but higher up they gaped open, and I kept expecting to see movement in them. A face, a hand. Ryan was breathing too fast, that panicky rhythm that meant he was spiraling. I'd seen it before, usually during tests or when his mom called during school. The forest pressed against the fence, trees so dense they looked solid, pine and oak and something that made the air smell like decay. We found a spot where someone had cut the chain link and peeled it back like the lid on a can. "So we're really doing this?" Casey asked. Nobody answered. Luke went first, ducking through, then Casey, then me and Ryan, who looked like he was walking to his execution. The forest was colder. That shouldn't have been possible, but it was. Our phone lights made narrow tunnels in the dark, catching on bark and exposed roots and something that might have been animal bones. We walked single file, nobody speaking. There was no path, just trees and darkness and the sound of our breathing. 5 minutes in, Luke stopped. "This is stupid," he said. "There's nothing here. Let's go back. Check out the hospital instead." "Yeah," Casey said quickly. "The hospital. Better idea." We turned around. That's when something moved in the trees behind us. Heavy, deliberate, the sound of something large displacing air. Casey backed into Luke, grabbing his arm. Ryan had gone statue still, and when I looked at him, his face had lost all color. "Animal," Luke said, but his voice was wrong. Too high. The thing moved again, closer, and with it came a sound like wind chimes made of bone, a clicking rattle that made my teeth ache. It stepped into the light. I want to tell you I processed what I was seeing, that my brain took in the details and categorized them in any useful way, but that's not what happened. What happened was my mind just stopped, like a computer program hitting a fatal error. 7 feet tall, maybe more. A shape that suggested a body, but refused to confirm one. Draped in moss and forest rot. Organic material that might have been fabric or flesh, or something in between. And the head? God. A deer skull, bleached white. Antlers, spreading like broken fingers. Around its neck, strung on what looked like sinew, hung dozens of teeth. Human teeth, maybe. Or animal. The distinction seemed less important than the fact of their existence. It had no eyes, but I felt it looking at us, looking into us. Luke made a sound I'd never heard him make before, something between a sob and a laugh. The thing's jaw opened, not like a jaw should, but hinging wrong, too wide, and when it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, from inside my skull and from the ground and from the air itself. "You come to wish." The words scraped like rusted metal dragging across bone. "All of you must wish." Casey was crying. I could hear it, small hitching sobs behind me, but I couldn't turn to look at her. Couldn't stop staring at the creature, at the way it seemed to shift and settle like it wasn't quite solid, wasn't quite real. The skull twitched toward Ryan. Ryan opened his mouth, closed it. His hands were shaking so badly, I could see it even in the bad light. "Wish," the creature said, and its voice got louder, resonant, shaking the trees. "Wish now." "I wish." Ryan started, then stopped. His voice was barely a whisper. "I wish to know if God is real." I don't know what I expected. Maybe nothing. Maybe for the thing to laugh or vanish or tell us we were all idiots playing with urban legends. But that's not what happened. The creature convulsed. Its body, that shapeless mass, began twitching violently, and the deer skull lurched sideways at an angle that made my stomach turn. The bone necklace rattled in the opposite direction, spinning, and the sound it made was like grinding vertebrae. Ryan screamed. Not a shout or a yell, a scream, the kind that carries agony and terror in equal measure. That sounds like someone being unmade at the molecular level. His hands shot to his head, fingers clawing at his skull, and then I saw it happen. His head was collapsing inward. The bones of his skull were folding like paper, caving in on themselves, and his face. Ryan's face, the one I'd known since we were 12, was disappearing into the void it left behind. The skin went slack and then concave, and the scream cut off into something wet and horrible, and then into nothing at all. He hit the ground. Casey's scream replaced his, raw and primal. Luke grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "Run," he said. We ran. I crashed through a low-hanging branch that whipped across my face, bark scraping my cheek raw. My phone was in my hand, light jerking wildly, turning the forest into a strobe nightmare of trees and shadows and nothing that made sense. Behind us I could hear it, that rattling, bone on bone, getting closer. Casey was sobbing as she ran, these gasping, hitching breaths between footfalls. Luke was ahead of her, pulling her by the wrist, and I was behind them both, and I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan. about the way his face had just collapsed, folded in on itself like wet cardboard. My foot caught on a root and I went down hard, phone flying from my hand. The impact knocked the air from my lungs. I scrabbled in the dirt, fingers finding leaves and moss, and something that felt horribly like bone before my hand closed around the phone. The light was facing back the way we'd come. The creature was there. Not far, maybe 20 feet, moving through the trees with that horrible fluid motion, branches bending around it like they were afraid to touch it. The deer skull was angled toward me, antlers scraping against bark, and the bone necklace swayed and clattered with each movement. I could see details now that I hadn't before, the way the moss covering its body seemed to grow and shift, pulsing like something alive. The teeth on the necklace weren't all the same size. Some were small, child-sized. Others were long and pointed, predator teeth. And there were other things strung between them. Small bones, finger bones maybe, and something that looked horrifyingly like a dried human ear. "Get up," Luke's voice, somewhere ahead in the darkness. I rolled onto my hands and knees, pushed myself up. My ankle screamed in protest, but held. I ran. The forest had become a maze. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow held something terrible. My lungs burned. The cold air felt like breathing broken glass. I could hear Luke and Casey ahead, crashing through undergrowth, and I pushed harder, trying to catch up. Behind me, that rattling never stopped. It stayed constant, rhythmic, like the creature was pacing itself, like it knew it didn't need to rush, like this was all part of something it had done 1,000 times before. My phone light caught Casey's jacket ahead, that bright red. I focused on it, used it as a beacon. We were running uphill now, the ground getting steeper, roots reaching across the path like fingers trying to trip us. My thighs burned. My ankle throbbed with each impact. Then Casey went down. She cried out, a sharp yelp of pain, and Luke skidded to a stop. I nearly crashed into him. Casey was on the ground clutching her leg, her phone a few feet away casting crazy shadows across her face. "I can't," she gasped. "My ankle, I can't." Luke looked back. Even in the bad light, I could see his face. The calculation happening there. The math of who lives and who dies. "Help me get her up," I said, moving to Casey's other side. We each took an arm, hauled her to her feet. She whimpered, tried to put weight on her right leg and nearly collapsed again. Luke and I locked our arms behind her back, made a kind of chair. She looped her arms around our necks. We moved slower now, so much slower. Casey's weight between us, her breathing ragged in my ear. The creature's rattling got louder, closer. I could feel its presence like a pressure change, and the air itself was being displaced by something too large, too wrong. "There," Luke panted. "I see the fence." And there it was, chain link glinting in our phone lights, and beyond it, the dark mass of the hospital. We were coming at it from an angle, not the way we'd entered. This section of fence was intact, but there was a spot maybe 10 yards down where it had been peeled back. We staggered toward it, Casey's weight making every step feel like we were wading through concrete. 5 yards. 3. Behind us, branches cracked. Not the small pops of twigs breaking. The deep groan of something large pushing through resistance. I risked a look back. The creature had closed the distance. It was right there, maybe 15 feet away, and in the better light near the fence line, I could see it clearly for the first time. It wasn't wearing the moss and rot. That was its skin, bark and organic material, fused together into something that might have once been alive, but had evolved past that into something else. The deer skull was partially embedded in its body, grown into it, and where the skull ended and the body began was impossible to determine. The antlers weren't antlers at all. They were bones, human bones, femurs and radius and ulna, all twisted and fused together into that branching structure. And the worst part, the part that made my bladder almost let go, was that the skull was moving. Not the creature's head, but the skull itself. The jaw was opening and closing in a rhythm that matched the rattling of the bone necklace, and I could see something behind the bone, something dark and writhing, like the inside of the skull was full of worms or maggots, or things that squirmed. "Go, go, go!" I screamed. We hit the fence line. Luke dropped Casey's arm, grabbed the peeled back section and hauled it up. The metal shrieked. Casey went under first, on her hands and knees, crawling. I was right behind her, and behind me I could hear the creature moving faster now, could hear that rattling building to a crescendo. I was halfway under when I felt something grab my jacket. Not a hand, nothing as simple as a hand. Something that felt like it had too many points of contact, like it was gripping me in 6 places at once. The fabric pulled taut, yanking me backward, and I screamed. Casey was on the other side, reaching back through, grabbing my arms. Luke was there too, pulling. I was caught between them, the fence cutting into my back, the creature's grip tightening. I could smell it now, rot and earth and something sweet underneath, like decomposition, like meat going bad in the sun. My jacket tore. The sound was loud, that ripping canvas noise, and suddenly I was sliding forward, under the fence, Luke and Casey falling backward with me on top. We landed in a heap on the asphalt. I rolled, looked back. The creature was pressed against the fence, not trying to climb it or break through, just standing there, that deer skull tilted, watching us. The bone necklace had gone still. In the parking lot lights I could see my jacket, or what was left of it, hanging from one of the fence posts. It was shredded, not cut. Shredded like something with claws had grabbed it. But the creature had no hands. "Come on," Luke said, already pulling Casey to her feet. "The hospital. We get inside, we're safe." I didn't know what made him think that. Didn't know what made him think we'd be safe anywhere. But the alternative was standing here in the parking lot while that thing watched us. So I got up and ran. The hospital entrance gaped open. Someone had torn the boards off years ago. Inside was darkness, deeper than the forest. And that smell, mold and decay and stale air that hadn't moved in decades. Our phones lit the way, catching on debris. A wheelchair rusted, one wheel missing. Medical charts scattered across the floor. Patient names still visible. An IV stand lying on its side. We moved into the lobby, a wide open space with a reception desk that had been stripped of anything valuable. The floor was tile, broken in places, and our footsteps echoed wrong, too loud, like the building was paying attention. "We can't stay here," Casey said. She was limping badly, putting almost no weight on her right leg. "It'll come in. It'll find us." "Then we go up," Luke said, gesturing to a stairwell on the far side of the lobby. "Get to the 2nd floor. Find a room we can barricade." "Or we go straight through," I said, pointing to a hallway that led deeper into the building. "Find the other side. Get back to the parking lot. Get to the car." Luke looked at Casey, then at me. I saw the decision forming, saw the exact moment he chose. "Through is faster," he said, already moving toward the hallway. We followed, Casey between us again, hobbling, trying to keep up. The hallway was narrower than the lobby, doors lining both sides. Most were closed. Some hung open, revealing rooms full of stripped beds and broken equipment. Our phone lights made everything worse, turning shadows into threats. making every corner a potential ambush. We passed a nurse's station. The desk was overturned, papers everywhere, and something had made a nest in the corner. I couldn't tell what. Blankets and trash and something else. Something organic that I didn't want to look at too closely. Then we heard it behind us. That rattling. Inside the building now. In the lobby. The sound echoed off the walls, distorted, making it impossible to tell exactly where it was coming from. But it was close. Getting closer. Faster, Luke hissed. Casey was crying again, quiet sobs that she was trying to muffle. We were moving as fast as we could, but her ankle was bad, really bad, and each step was agony for her. I could feel it in the way she gripped my shoulder, nails digging in through my shirt. The hallway branched. Luke took the left corridor without hesitating. We followed. This hallway was darker somehow, fewer windows, and the air felt thicker, harder to breathe, like the building's decay had concentrated here. Behind us, the rattling got louder. I risked a look back and saw nothing but darkness and the pathetic throw of our phone lights, but I could feel it. That presence, that wrongness. There, Luke said, pointing ahead. A door, different from the others, metal instead of wood, with a small window set at eye level. Emergency exit, maybe. A way out. We stumbled toward it, Casey whimpering with each step, and Luke hit it at full speed. It didn't budge. He slammed into it, bounced back, tried the handle. Locked. He threw his shoulder against it again and again, and the door rattled in its frame but held. The rattling was louder now, so loud it seemed to come from the walls themselves. I turned, putting myself between Casey and the direction we'd come, and my phone light caught movement at the end of the hallway. The creature was there. It had to hunch to fit in the corridor, that deer skull scraping the ceiling tiles, bits of acoustic foam raining down as it moved, and the sound of its passage was wrong, wet and grinding, like meat being forced through a space too small. Luke, I said, and my voice was surprisingly steady. We need to move. The door's locked. Then we find another door. Luke grabbed Casey's arm and pulled her away from the exit. We ran back the way we'd come, but the creature was blocking that path now, so we took the first door we came to. It opened into a patient room, and we slammed it shut behind us. The room was small. A single bed stripped to the frame, a window with bars on it, glass long gone, letting in cold air and the smell of the forest. A small bathroom in the corner, door hanging off one hinge. We're trapped, Casey said. She'd given up trying to stop crying. Tears tracked down her face, catching in our phone lights. We're trapped and it's going to kill us. There has to be another way out, I said, moving to the window. The bars were solid, old but not rusted enough to break. I shook them away. They didn't move. Behind us in the hallway the rattling had stopped. The silence was worse, so much worse, because silence meant it was listening, hunting, planning. Luke was at the door, ear pressed against it, trying to hear movement. His hand was on the handle, knuckles white. I don't hear anything, he whispered. That doesn't mean it's not there, Casey said. We waited, seconds that felt like hours. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my temples. The cold air from the window made me shiver. Or maybe that was just fear. Probably fear. Then something scraped against the door. Not a knock, a long, drawn-out scrape, like bone on metal. The door shuddered. Luke jumped back, nearly dropping his phone. The scraping came again, lower this time, then higher, like the thing was testing the door, learning its dimensions. The handle started to turn. Luke grabbed it, tried to hold it, but the force on the other side was immense. The handle turned despite his grip, despite him throwing his weight against it, and the door began to open. "Help me!" Luke screamed. I ran to the door, adding my weight. Casey was there too, her bad ankle forgotten. All of us pressing against the door as it slowly, inexorably opened. It was like trying to hold back a freight train, like trying to stop gravity. The door opened 6 inches, then a foot. Through the gap, I could see the hallway, and I could see the creature. It had changed, or maybe I was just seeing it more clearly. The deer skull was at ground level now, and I realized the creature didn't have a fixed orientation. It could move in any direction, could reorient itself however it needed. The skull was sideways now, antlers scraping the door frame, and behind it, that body of moss and rot and wrong, and in the darkness behind the skull's eye sockets, I saw movement, saw things writhing. The door opened another foot. "The bathroom!" Casey screamed. "Go, go!" We broke, all of us at once, abandoning the door and sprinting for the bathroom. It was tiny, barely enough room for the 3 of us, but we crammed inside and Luke grabbed the door. This one was lighter, flimsier, but it had a lock. He turned it just as the patient room door slammed open behind us. The creature filled the doorway. Through the crack at the bottom of the bathroom door, I could see it. Could see that mass of organic material spreading across the tile, and the shadow it cast was wrong. Too many angles, too much depth. Then came the voice. "Wish," it said, and the word rattled through the building. "Must wish, all must wish." Luke's face was white. He was backed against the sink, hands gripping the porcelain like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Casey was in the corner, arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly. The door shuddered. Something hit it, heavy, and the wood cracked. "Wish," the creature said again. "You wish now." The door splintered. Wood shards exploded inward. A piece hit my arm, drawing blood. Through the hole in the door, I could see the deer skull, could see those empty eye sockets looking in at us. Luke's voice came out strangled, desperate. "I wish you were dead," he said. "I just wish you were dead." The creature's response was immediate. The deer skull snapped back, and that rattling started again, frenzied, and Luke's hands flew to his back. He screamed. Not like Ryan. Different. This was a scream of confusion more than pain, at least at first. Then the pain came. I watched his body arch backward, watched his shirt collapse inward like something was being pulled out from underneath. And I understood. The creature was removing his spine, not all at once, bone by bone, vertebrae by vertebrae. I could see them going, could see the shirt fabric cave where each bone disappeared. Luke's body bent backward, farther than any body should bend, and the scream went on until his lungs couldn't support it anymore, and it became a wet gurgle. Then he fell. Casey was screaming, had been screaming. I grabbed her, pulled her close, but she fought me, pushed me away. "No," she shouted at the creature, at the deer skull watching us through the broken door. "I wish none of this ever happened. I wish we never came here." And the world broke. That's the only way I can describe it. Reality fractured like glass, and through the cracks I could see something else. Other versions of this moment, other timelines where we made different choices, where we didn't come, where we turned back, where Ryan said something else, all of them existing simultaneously, overlapping, bleeding into each other. The buzzing started in my skull, building and building until I thought my head would explode. The bathroom walls rippled like water. Casey was there, and then not there, and then there again, flickering like a broken film strip. The creature's rattling became a roar, became everything, became the only sound in existence. I fell or flew or both. Time inverted, collapsed, expanded. I saw Ryan's face caving in again, but backward. Saw it inflate like a balloon. Saw Luke's spine returning, then disappearing again. Saw Casey running, screaming, laughing all at the same time. Then it stopped. Complete silence, complete stillness. I was on my back, staring up at nothing. No, not nothing. Stars. I was staring at stars. My hands were on asphalt, cold and rough. I sat up slowly, carefully, like any sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile reality had formed around me. I was in the parking lot. Not near it, in it, lying next to Luke's Camaro. The driver's side door hung open. The dome light was on, casting everything in sickly yellow. I stood. My legs shook but held. I turned slowly, taking it in. The parking lot, the hospital in the distance, the forest pressing against the fence line, and Luke's car. I knew before I looked. Somehow I knew, but I looked anyway. Luke was in the driver's seat, slumped over the steering wheel, his body bent at an angle that was only possible because there was nothing inside to stop it bending that way. His shirt had collapsed inward, empty, and even from outside the car, I could see the void where his spine should have been. I made a sound, not quite a scream, not quite a sob, something in between. I walked around to the passenger side on legs that didn't feel like mine, opened the door with hands that had forgotten how to shake. Casey was there, folded in on herself like origami. Her torso compressed, caved in, her body bent over her knees in a way that revealed the complete absence of ribs. Her rib cage was gone, removed, taken as payment. Her head rested on the dashboard, eyes open but not seeing. Not anymore. I closed the door carefully, gently, like she might wake up if I made too much noise. Ryan's bike was still there, still propped against the light pole where he'd left it. Ryan was next to it. I couldn't look at him, not directly. My eyes skated away from what was left of his face, from the collapsed ruin of his skull, but I saw enough. I saw the bike visible through where his head used to be. I saw the way his body looked, boneless, deflated. I sat down on the parking lot, right there on the cold asphalt, and I laughed. Not because anything was funny, just because something had to come out, and laughter was what my body chose. It turned into crying pretty quickly, then back to laughing. Then I couldn't tell which one I was doing more. Eventually, I called 911. I told them there'd been an accident at County Memorial. They asked what kind of accident, and I said, "You need to come. Just please come." The cops arrived first, then the ambulances, then more cops. They separated me from the bodies, wrapped me in a foil blanket, asked questions I couldn't answer. What happened? Where were you? What did you see? I told them the truth. All of it. The creature, the wishes, the hospital. They wrote it down with the kind of careful attention people give the clearly insane. By morning, I was in the back of a police car. By afternoon, I was in a psychiatric ward. They were kind. That's what made it worse. Everyone so gentle, so understanding. Asking me about what I'd experienced, nodding when I talked about the creature, taking careful notes. The medications came in little cups, pills that made everything feel distant and manageable. It was a psychotic break, the doctor told me after the first week. Trauma manifesting as hallucination. You survived something terrible and your mind created a narrative to cope. I learned to agree with him. Learned to say the right things. To show the right amount of progress. 3 months of good behavior, of taking the pills, of going to group therapy and pretending I believed what they believed. Then they approved an outing, a supervised trip back into the world. "We think you're ready," the doctor said. ready to reintegrate. I know where I'm going. I know what I'll do. The creature said we all had to wish. Ryan did, Luke did, Casey did, but I never made mine. The creature is still waiting. It has to be. Those are the rules. I'll go back to those woods. I'll find it in the darkness between the trees, and I'll say the words that have been circling in my head for 3 months. The only wish that makes sense now. Maybe it won't work. Maybe the creature is gone. Maybe the rules don't function that way. Maybe I'm just crazy after all, and I'll wander those woods until I die of exposure. But I have to try. Because this, right here, breathing and walking and pretending to be alive while they're in the ground, this is the real horror. This is the real price. And tomorrow, I'm going to pay it. My aunt was a strange person in many normal ways. She wasn't eccentric per se, but had specific ways of living her life that obtained a unique focus. Diana lived her whole life alone in the well-kept home, isolated in the woods, from which she drove exactly 21.5 miles to an elder care home where she worked. She was also completely and utterly obsessed with death. I know it's normal to think about death. For most of my early adulthood, I had a near obsessive fixation on it myself. I would often lie at night, trying to fall asleep when the idea of my eventual oblivion struck me, startling me back to an existential terror that would put off rest for another hour, until my mind could calm down and settle back into rest. I would visit graveyards, some where I had no relatives or friends, just to passively experience that rest so that I could accept it more easily. It never helped. But my aunt's fixation was more extreme in proximity and reaction. My episodes could be calmed down, my mind distracted, but Diana lived around death. According to my family, her father died while she was still in our grandma's womb, and then she grew up and around several failed pregnancies before my mother was born, which made our grandmother even more stressed and unstable. Diana was 15 by the time my mother entered the picture, which, according to Mom, further isolated them. When my mother was only 2, Grandma had a heart attack in front of her and her sister. Diana stood stiff as a board, unable to do a thing. My grandmother grew paler and paler, writhing on the ground as if she were a deer struck by a truck. Diana stood there frozen in a motionless, tear-streaked panic until her shock faded and 911 was finally called. But it was far too late for the doctors to do anything. My mother only really remembers staring up at Diana, shaking slightly, her eyes bloodshot in terror. By the time my mom had memories, her sister had gone off to college, then medical school, then finally into elder care, to only be seen again on holidays and funerals, more consistently appearing at the latter. The main time my mother ever saw Diana was when she was crying profusely at the funeral of every single friend or loved one in our small town. Without failure, Diana would show up, well-dressed and outwardly grieving, and be allowed to enter and sob profusely throughout the whole funeral, leaving just before the final prayers were done, never to be seen or talked to until the next one. According to those who saw her driving away, her eyes were still waterfalls coursing down her pale face. The families would often only know her by association with my father or mother, and she would have rarely even met the person to whom she was pouring her grief out. My mother guessed Diana was so afraid of death that she attempted a harsh form of exposure therapy, and my father, who had only met her at a single Christmas party, guessed she loved the attention and environment of grief. It was this strange, transitory relationship that I had with my aunt, made up of vague memories at Thanksgivings, Christmases, and those dreadful days where we all had to dress in black. She always stood at the edge of whatever gathering we were at, so odd that even we kids noticed it. My cousins joked that she was scared of everything, couldn't stand to even look people in the eye. I tell you all of this to try to give context to what happened last week. My Aunt Diana had passed away, apparently from some sort of heart condition, and left her home and everything within to me. Someone who's spoken to her perhaps twice. I was so taken aback, as was my mom, dad, and sisters. My sisters joked she left her home to me because I was the one she hated the least, due to them pranking her with a whoopee cushion one Christmas. But I was strangely unnerved. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt like a fly taking a first step on a spider's web, rather than a simple notary. I wasn't able to head out to my aunt's place until last Monday due to my work. Pediatrics is hard to get covered. She moved away from our hometown and into the mountains, to a cluster of isolated communities in the Appalachians, to pursue her dreams of being an elder care specialist. Her own home was part of a rural sort of neighborhood, houses separated by patches of woods, but still close enough to be within walking distance of other houses. I was surprised by how gray it was, how plain. I briefly wondered if it would be worth it to just hire someone to go through my aunt's stuff, but my paycheck disagreed. I would have to catalog what was left of my aunt's life myself. Getting inside, the interior matched the exterior in dreariness. The living room only had a couch, a glass table in front of it, and an old analog TV sitting on a shelf. But on the walls, there was a myriad of paintings. Some were those old medieval depictions of the Black Death, others were depictions of hell, and others were just strange depictions of skulls, skeletons, and angels descending upon dying men as saviors. And by on the walls, I mean they were covered head to toe in these paintings. A screen door broke up the paintings, leading into the backyard and further beyond the woods. Creeped out, I moved on to a hallway leading out to the left, which led to all the other rooms of the home. The first door I opened nearly made me scream, as when I did, with that little light bled in from the living room, I saw what seemed to be a dog, sitting up in the middle of the room. My panicked hand searched the wall and flicked on the light switch, revealing a golden retriever sitting frozen in place, its eyes trained on the door with its mouth hanging open. My heartbeat began to slow as I thought the dog must be some sort of statue, but looking at the rest of the room, I realized it was taxidermy. Ducks, owls, deer heads, raccoons, armadillos. All manner of creatures sit posed on shelves or on trophy racks. There was even a bear head above the window that showed the nearby woods. Bending down to look at the platform the golden was sitting on, there was a small plaque that read, "Benny, beloved companion, even while gone, you bring smiles." Surrounding the plaque were a series of Polaroids of a young Diana freshly moved into her house, which appeared far less dreary in the idyllic filter. Sat beside her was a yellow ball of fluff with two black pinprick eyes. The rest of the photos showed them around the house, Benny slowly getting older and older, until he appeared as he did now, only the slightest hint of graying around his otherwise bright, sunny muzzle. Close to Benny, I could almost sense the slightest heat coming from his perfect fur. Feeling creeped out by Benny and the deer statue, both of which I felt like were staring at me, I backed out of the room and closed the door. The next room seemed to be a sort of library which, at a brief glance, seemed to cover a variety of topics. Apocalypse, afterlives, underworlds, deals with death, definitions of life and soul. Like the paintings, the walls were covered head to toe in these books that dealt with every religion, philosophy, and esoteric thought. Some real old-looking ones were stored in individual glass cases, with a box of gloves next to them. Most of them were unmarked with no title on the front except one. It seemed far older than the others, gray, nearly crumpled pages making up its insides, A plaque beneath it read, "Copy of the Voynich manuscript, recreated beautifully by Dr. Sfald." Leaving the library, I felt less creeped out than when I left the taxidermy room. The next room down the hall had a strange door frame, bending 3/4 up each side, and made out of some wood rather than the gray walls that surrounded the rest of the house. I laughed, joking to myself that she had a whole coffin put in her home. Opening the door, I was surprised to see I was correct. It was a wooden coffin, plain, bare planks inside. The whole thing of note was the shelves installed in the coffin, containing around 30 VHS tapes, with the other shelves containing DVDs and a camera seemingly capable of making recordings on VHS. Immediately my interest was piqued, but I decided to clear the rest of the house. The next room down the hallway was the bedroom, which itself was mostly plain, besides a heart monitor and a fluid system like you would see at a hospital, next to the bed. On the nightstands there were old family photos of Diana and her mom, a couple of her and her home smiling at the camera. It was like I was staring at half-remembered ghosts, these people who resembled nothing of what they are now. There was also a bathroom, only available through the bedroom. The final room down that hall was the creepiest. The first thing I noticed was an angled roof, as if it were supposed to mimic a cellar. Little flowers, ceramic angels, and stars dotted the ceiling. On the floor there were various blankets, making the floor uneven. In the corner, with a little mobile hanging right above it, was a crib. A single baby doll sat in it, a pillow over its face. I barely got a step into that room before I backed out. The only other rooms of note were the kitchen and the laundry room, their openings sitting opposite the hallway that led to the rest of the house. However, no weird stuff in those rooms. But it was remarkably clean. No dishes left to clean or put up. The whole house felt so strangely neat and undisturbed, with only a tiny layer of dust on everything. The emptiness felt fresh. I had decided to stay at the house for a few days to go through her stuff, see about getting something done with her home, and finally go to a funeral which had, apparently, already been arranged. I decided to start with those VHS tapes in the coffin closet. Only 2 of them were marked, wrapped with a single red tape. I decided to go top to bottom and just get to those odd tapes when I got to them. I put it into the old VCR in the living room and plopped on the couch, eating some of the fast food I had picked up on the way over. My body was aching from moving my stuff in, and I mainly wanted to see if these were maybe work-related or yet another strange hobby of hers. The tape begins winding inside the machine, the screen coming to life, only to open up to more darkness. In the ambient buzz of the recording, I heard what I thought was strange, almost hiccuping breathing. But after getting a little closer to the TV, I realized it was sobbing. I had heard it a couple of times before, from the corners of churches and funeral homes. The camera peeked around the corner, revealing a bedroom you'd see in an elderly home. Cheap bed, nightstand with flowers, and a foldable feeding table attached to the bed. An old woman lay on her back, her mouth agape. There are these awful gasping sounds like she was using her whole chest to squeeze her lungs, just to get any oxygen in her. The sobbing got closer to the microphone, and I realized that whoever was recording this must be in the closet of the old woman's room. A coat rack becoming visible in the moonlight as the camera pushed the closet door open more. The old woman continued to make those awful gasping noises for another 30 or so seconds, at which point I had dropped my food and was pressed against the back of the couch, trying to get away from the screen. Then she stopped. The sobbing intensified for another minute, until I heard a high-pitched, electronic whine. The old woman's chest, which had seemingly decompressed and become empty, filled again. She took no breath in, but her mouth began to move with an alien, puppet-like movement. It is so dark and wet. I pull my hand away from the walls, and it feels like stone snakeskin. I hear a great rumble through the depths, like a snake digging in the dirt. The old woman's chest collapses and then fills up once more. I can hear the rough crackling of bone as her ribs reform into place. I claw at the end of a tunnel, knee-deep in liquid. I hear it from the way I came. It wants me to dig. I am so afraid. Can anyone hear me? The corpse's chest collapses for the last time. The person holding the camera gasps quietly, pauses for a moment, and then begins sobbing again, this time far more violently. This went on for another 10 or 20 seconds, and then the tape ended. The words burned into my mind like a tattoo, horrid scars on my mind. I was shocked into terror then, and I am still shaken. Was this some near-death experience? The words were so clear, so awfully clear as they rasped out of her dead throat. I had to simply sit there for maybe 10 minutes, trying to collect myself and bring my heartbeat back down. The house now felt both far more empty and far less so. The woods outside painted in moonlit black, beyond the living room's lights, becoming far more oppressive. I could almost twist the branches into crooked figures, lingering, watching my terror. I nervously retrieved the tape and turned it to the coffin closet. The plastic feeling cold under the skin. I couldn't help but feel the hairs on my neck stand up as I went past Benny's room. I decided against further exploration of my aunt's haunting and potentially criminal videos and decided to sleep, making sure to lock all the doors and try to cover as many windows with curtains or even blankets. Thankfully, her bathroom is actually quite nice. The warm, consistent current kept the thoughts of death away for at least a little bit, wrapped in the soft embrace of water. I closed my eyes for a second and was struck with a sudden, explosive sensation. Someone was in the bathroom with me. At least I felt it. I peeked around the curtain, seeing nothing in the steamy room, yet the feeling persisted. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My spine was electric with the sensation. I tried to finish bathing, but I rushed through and got out quickly. Standing in front of the sink, I brushed my teeth as quickly as I could. The damp rug underneath me felt like millions of tiny centipedes. Legs under my feet. I kept looking around, trying to dispel whatever paranoia had taken me. Then I smelled the briefest scent of mud and decomposition, that miasma of meat beginning to rot. I had a mental image of my aunt freshly clawed out of her own grave, floating invisibly in the bathroom, her chest rising and collapsing like the old woman. When I turned around suddenly, trying to grasp an invisible presence, I happened to look down at the mat I stood on. There were two impressions, slightly caked in mud right before my feet. I've been shaking in bed since that moment. Tried to look at hotels nearby, but there aren't any, and I have no friends nearby either. For now, I am simply trying to get some logic into what I've seen and what's happened. Maybe I tracked mud in, moved, and scared myself into thinking there was a ghost. Maybe the tapes were some sort of weird film my aunt was making, or some near-death lucidity, or maybe my aunt edited these. I don't know. But despite how fearful I am, I want to find out. There is something my aunt left behind to be solved, and my strange connection with her pushes me onwards. I know it's weird, but I feel like I have a connection to her, and what may have happened. I'll update in the morning if anything else happens. I knew the place had a past. I didn't know the story wasn't over. The house looked way worse in person, but I knew what I was getting into when I bought the place. At least, that's what I keep telling myself. The listing had said, Victorian charm with a storied past, but anyone within 50 miles knows what really happened there. I wasn't trying to hide it. In fact, as a budding horror writer, I was counting on it. Paranormal tourism is big business, and the whole haunted bed and breakfast gimmick could only help my career. I got out of my car and looked at the house, one of 6 aging Victorians. It stood beneath towering live oaks, with Spanish moss swaying like ghosts in the humid breeze. Locals called them the Sad Sisters, remnants of a small town that never quite took off. Too far inland, too overshadowed by Florida's coastal allure. And then came the 1985 mass murder, the final nail in its coffin. Perfect, I thought. My plan was simple. Move in with my cat Ellie, make the necessary repairs to pass inspection, and start taking reservations for the Good Morning Inn by Halloween. I even had a horror author YouTube channel set up to document the journey. This place was going to make me a name. I flipped on my phone's camera and gave myself a once-over. Eyes big and bright, wide smile, energy up. Showtime. I hit go live. Welcome to my newest, creepiest, most ill-advised decision yet, I said, turning the camera toward the house. Say hello to the future site of the Good Morning Inn, and possibly my untimely demise. I drew out morning with a playfully dark edge, lowering my voice for dramatic effect. My fans love this kind of stuff. The day was sunny and bright, so when I opened the front door, I felt like I was staring into a dark void. All the windows had been boarded up since, well, 1985. I carried Ellie's pet carrier into the foyer. She pinned her ears back and growled. "Oh, hush, you're gonna love it here," I said, doubting every word. I put her carrier on the floor and unzipped the flap. She sat back in the corner, refusing to come out. I couldn't blame her. The air felt still and heavy, like the house had been holding its breath for decades. My phone buzzed, an apology from the movers. "Your delivery's been delayed until Monday." Great. I had a cat, a duffel bag, a half-charged phone, and an empty murder house. I wandered into the kitchen and flipped the light switch. Nothing. I groaned. Apparently, the electricity hadn't been turned on yet. Just then, the front door clicked shut behind me, leaving me standing in near total darkness. I heard Ellie growl in the foyer. "At least you've got night vision," I muttered. That reminded me about Ellie's pet cam. It had night vision too. As strange as it sounds, she has her own TikTok channel, and somehow way more followers than I do. No idea why people love watching a cat wander around with a camera strapped to her neck, but the likes and shares help pay for her food and vet bills. So who was I to judge? "Come here, Miss Ellie," I said, gently coaxing her out of the carrier. She wasn't thrilled, but she let me clip the camera to her collar. The moment it was secure, she sniffed the air like something offended her, then slinked off down the hall. I propped the front door open to let in some light and took a look around. Dark wood paneling lined the foyer walls. An old chandelier, draped in cobwebs, hung motionless above me. To my right, a grand staircase twisted up into sinister-looking shadows. Still, I could see the potential. Cleaned up, restored, it would be gorgeous. Moody, atmospheric. Just enough haunted charm to thrill the guests without driving them away. Exactly what I'd imagined. Exactly what I needed. I couldn't wait to show my fans the place. I smoothed my hair, took a deep breath, and started recording. And here we are, guys. Murder House, Day 1. I pulled an exaggerated, wide-eyed yikes expression, then swept the camera around the foyer, down the hallway, and up the shadowed staircase. In the phone's light, it looked like something straight out of a horror film. I walked upstairs. Each step creaked under my feet. "Yep, this is the house," I said. "This is where I'll be living from now on." In the master bedroom, I panned the camera across the faded, puke green wallpaper peeling in strips. Ghostly outlines of long-gone furniture were imprinted on the walls. It was perfect for my purpose. Nope, Not sleeping in here, I said flatly. The bathroom wasn't much better. The toilet and sink were both rust-stained, and the mirror above them was coated in grime. A dull film warped my reflection into something blurry and wrong. I zoomed in on my face, widened my eyes, and let out a theatrical shriek. Inside, I smiled. They were going to love this. There was another bedroom down the hall, somewhat cleaner, with bright yellow walls. I guess this is the room I'll sleep in, I said. At the end of the nearly pitch-black hall was another door, shut tight. I didn't need a floor plan to know what it was. "This is it," I whispered. "This is where it happened." I turned the camera on myself and tried to look terrified. Honestly, it wasn't hard. "Should I go in?" I said. "I'm sort of freaking out right now." I flipped the camera back around and showed my hand on the doorknob. Slowly, I twisted it. The door creaked open inch by inch. "Here we go. If you never hear from me again, please call the cops." I stepped in and was hit by a wave of foul air. Not just stale, like the rest of the house. Something worse. Sour and deeply unpleasant. I held out my phone to light the room. Instantly, goosebumps rippled across my skin. My breath caught. For a moment, it felt like my heart stopped. The room was empty, but the walls, once covered in whimsical children's wallpaper, were stained and splattered with old, dried blood. My jaw dropped. A cold flush of reality hit me. Suffocating. This wasn't a setting for a horror novel, not an aesthetic for thrill seekers or ghost hunters. This was where it had happened. Not a story, not fiction. Real lives, real death. "What the?" I blurted. "They didn't even clean it up?" The truth hit me hard. This wasn't some haunted B&B fantasy. It was still a crime scene. And now I was living in it. I turned the camera off. I needed out, now. I bolted down the stairs and into the sunlight. What the hell had I gotten myself into? I stood outside for a long time staring back at the house. "Get a grip, Joan," I told myself. "Isn't this exactly what you wanted?" A smile tugged at my lips. Yes, but that didn't mean I wanted to spend the night inside. I had made up my mind. Grab Ellie, drive back to Jack's, and hole up in a hotel until I was ready to tackle this adventure. First, I just had to get her. The sunshine gave me a little courage. I marched back inside, wedged the front door open, and started searching. I called her name. Nothing. I checked every room, upstairs and down. No cat. Where the hell could she be? My gaze drifted to the one place I hadn't checked, the bathroom door. Still closed. No way she could have gotten in there, right? I had to check. No way was I leaving without her. I stopped in front of the basement door, phone flashlight in hand. With a deep breath, I eased it open. A steep, narrow staircase disappeared into darkness below. Carefully, I started down the steps. "Ellie?" I called. My voice sounded small. The air was cool and thick with the scent of age and dampness. A musty chill settled over my skin. To my surprise, the basement was much larger than I'd expected. The shadow stretched far beyond the reach of my phone's glow. I moved slowly, sweeping the light across the space. The farther I went, the more something felt wrong. The place seemed too large, like it extended beyond the house's footprint. Weird, but hey, incredible bonus for the B&B, right? "Ellie, are you down here?" I called. "Ellie, come here, kitty. Meow, meow." Silence. At the far end, I stopped in front of a solid concrete wall with a door embedded in it. A door? Down here? Curiosity pushed aside caution. I reached for the handle. Locked. I gave it a shake, but it wouldn't budge. The longer I stared, the more unsettling it felt. Why was it here? What lay beyond? And why did it feel like it wasn't meant to be opened? Just then, my phone buzzed. Notifications poured in. tons of new comments on my channel. I couldn't resist. I tapped to check. Oh my god, I love this place already. It's so creepy. Dude, do not go down in that basement. Joan, please tell me you're not sleeping here tonight. There's definitely some bad juju in that house. Where's Ellie? I want to see the kitty cam. Yes, the pet cam. Why didn't I think of that earlier? I tried to open Ellie's cam, but the screen just spun. No video. Only the audio came through. A burst of static, then kibble crunching. Ellie eating somewhere. But the sound was cut off abruptly, replaced by a low, tense rumble in her throat. A growl. A long second passed, then creak. The unmistakable groan of a floorboard. My pulse spiked. The audio feed crackled as if something jolted the mic. Ellie's growl turned frantic, building into a hiss, then scampering paws thumping hard and fast against wood. She was running, not toward me, but away, deeper into the house. The audio dipped, muffled, like she'd plunged somewhere enclosed. Faint thumps echoed behind her, heavy and deliberate. Footsteps. I froze, staring at the locked door in front of me. The feed grew echoey, damp-sounding. Basement? How? A skittering stop, then frantic scratching. Meows turned to yowls, high and desperate. Claws on something unyielding. And those footsteps? Closer now. Slow, heavy, leather creaking. The audio erupted into chaos. Ellie's furious screeches pierced the speaker, claws raking, teeth snapping. A low guttural yell cut through, male and ragged, grunts of effort. The mic shook with thuds and scuffles, like a fight in the dark. Then a sharp hiss of static. A burst, then nothing. My heart slammed against my ribs. Ellie. My Ellie, trapped in there, with whoever that was. I leaned in, ear pressed to the door. Silence from this side, but the app, dead air. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get the hell out, but I couldn't leave her. I gripped the doorknob. This time it turned easily, unlocked. My pulse roared in my ears. I was shaking, terrified. I pushed the door open. Total darkness. A black hole. I reached in with my phone, trying to catch some of it in the light. My breath caught. A tunnel, dirt floor, dirt walls. Rough, uneven, like something dug it by hand. Ellie? I whispered. Mommy's here. Come on, girl. We need to go. Meow, meow. Nothing. Only silence. I stepped inside. The air hit me. Musty, foul, and something worse. A thick, sour stench. Sweat. Decay. Ellie? My voice cracked. Then, something pressed down on the back of my neck. Cold, heavy. A hand. I froze. Couldn't move. Could barely breathe. That awful reek filled my nose and mouth. I gagged. My stomach heaved. A voice rasped in my ear. Low, rough, full of hate. My tragedy is not your entertainment. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I bolted, raced up those stairs 2 at a time, phone clenched in a death grip, through the front door into the daylight, if you could call it that. The sun was already sinking behind the trees, the yard awash in long shadows. I ran straight to my car and slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. For a long time I just sat there, shaking, my heart hammering so loud I could barely think. I kept glancing at the house, at that open door, at the windows, dark as eyes. I don't know what I heard down there. I don't know what just happened. All I know is that Ellie's still inside, and I'm not going back in there alone. Not tonight. The sun's going down fast. I'll stay in the car for a bit, try to think, figure out what to do. If anyone's watching this, If you know anything about this house or that door, or whoever the hell that was, please tell me. I'm scared out of my mind right now.